So, Katie, two people robbed an old blind man and his wife who died of an aneurysm during the commission of the robbery.
That is amazing.
Is that funny?
That is so funny. And welcome to Useful Idiots. I'm your host, Katie Helper.
All right, welcome to Useful Idiots. I'm Matt Taibbi.
And I'm Katie Helper.
This is the new Useful Idiots. It's Useful Idiots Unchained. Do we have another word for it?
Unchained, untethered.
Right. Useful
Reclaiming our
vengeance.
time. Useful
Right.
Idiots with a vengeance. Yeah.
Right, yeah, exactly. Useful Idiots Ragnarok. That's what I want to
Yeah,
go
Ragnarok. I have to see that though, before I can approve that.
Anyway, it's a sequel. We're hoping it's a good sequel, like Godfather.
We know it's a good sequel.
Right. Yeah.
Like European Vacation, which is better than Vacation.
Yeah, I don't know if I can agree with you on that.
You don't know if you can co-sign that take?
Yeah, I think we're gonna have to take that one off air to discuss that.
We're gonna have to have a debate on Substack only.
Yeah, exactly. Have a Substack only debate over.
Yeah.
Which vacation movie was actually the best?
But should we tell people? We kind of told people are still asking, even though we gave that really honest explanation about, my attempted movie deal with Bashir al-Assad, which Rolling Stone didn't really like. Well, I didn't tell that part about the movie deal. We just talked about my glowing profile and my wanting him to be the third host.
Right, and then the chemistry issues off the air that we just didn't want to get into.
Yeah.
The reality is we just don't know. That's the honest answer. Is that we had, let's just say, a parting of ways, differences of about something.
Yeah, I mean, Matt's honestly, I demanded $5 million an episode.
Right.
And
yes. they wouldn't go any higher than 4.
Yeah, they wouldn't go any higher than 4. So, and honestly, that's a problem because I asked for $5 million. No, I'm exaggerating. I asked for a contract of just $5 million a year, and I asked for Matt to get $4 million a year.
Right.
And because of reparations, and they rejected that because they are problematic,
patriarchal.
Patriarchal. I'm just asking. I'm just putting it out there. Like, no bad blood, but you'd think that they would be into paying a woman for her labor and emotional labor that goes into doing a show.
And actually, this is an opportunity for everybody else to make up for the mistake that they made. So, at the end of the show, Katie, you can just offer your Venmo information so that people can Venmo you for your emotional labor.
Yeah.
Right.
Or a compromise is they can just become Substack subscribers.
Or that. Right.
But actually, I'm going to have to set up my own Substack.
Right, because there's always the danger that I could somehow get some of that money.
We have to make it 70-30 me, I think.
Yeah, at least.
So, oh my God, plus the Jewish thing.
I'm
giving you a discount. I'm giving you a break with the 70-30.
Yeah.
It should be 80-20, but I'm not that kind of person.
I'm not actually, I don't know how much, my people's had to do with the Jewish question, but...
The Jewish question? Really, Matt?
Yeah,
it's okay, it's a Marx term. It's not a Hitler term. Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I think I settled on a good final solution.
Right, yes. Well, that's what we're all looking for in life, is a final solution, right?
Come on, that deserves a real Hitler appreciation laugh.
Right.
Someone's gonna edit this. It'll be
what was Hitler's laugh like? I don't even know.
Oh no, I meant ha ha ha. Good joke about Hitler and the Jews and final solution laugh.
Right.
I wonder what his laugh was like. Do you think
he guffawed, or do you think it was more of one of those sort of wheezing type laughs?
I bet it was
like the Eddie Murphy laugh. Like,
it's like a donkey laugh.
Yeah. Do you think it was like that, or do you think it was I laugh too hard, right? So do you think it's...
Oh, it's so great though. No, I think he was like me. He was like, I often will say in a really annoying way, I'm like, oh, that's funny, and I don't laugh, but I think it's funny. But when I lose it, I really laugh hard. I feel like that was Hitler.
Right, like he didn't laugh often, but when he did, he really let go. You know who had a good sense of humor was Stalin. Stalin had a really good sense of humor. Yeah.
What's that joke about sneezing? Someone sneezing?
I don't know.
Okay, it's like a crowded room of Stalin. Like Stalin's addressing a big audience. It makes him sound like a stand-up. He's addressing the whatever Soviet Parliament or Soviet
the
whatever.
Fifth Presidium or something like that. Yeah, the People's Congress.
Yes, and someone sneezes, and he goes, "Was that any of you in the front row?" And no one raises their hand. and so he shoots the whole front row, or he has them shot.
Naturally.
Keeps going until the end. This is a joke. And then there's no one left but one person at the very back row, and he goes, "God bless you," or Gesundheit, or whatever you'd say.
I like it. It's a good one. Yeah, very good. Well, we could do a whole segment on the excellent senses of humor of dictators sometime in the future. But we should move on to the segments of the show. There's a lot to get to this week.
And also, someone suggested that for people just joining us, that we re-ground people in what the origin story of the 4 food groups is, which is your
Sure. So the 4 food groups are basically once upon a time I knew a television producer who told me that the 4 food groups of news were Democrats suck, Republicans suck, isn't that terrible, and isn't that weird. Basically, every news story fit into one of those 4 categories once upon a time. It's a little bit narrower now.
Yeah.
And he was the point was that a lot of what TV was about at the time was you were going for this effect of, hey, isn't that weird, when people watched the broadcast. So we just sort of run through. We're consciously trying to fill all those gaps in the show, and we start off with Democrats suck, then Republicans suck, then isn't that terrible, and isn't that weird. So for Democrats suck this week, we have a story by an old friend, Alex Perrine.
Let's get him on the show.
Yeah, we should get him on the show sometime. I co-hosted a podcast with him once upon a time, and we had an absolutely horrible experience working at First Look Media together that I'm sure both of us would rather forget. But very funny guy, and he wrote a very good article in the New Republic. This new article, "Most of the World Has a Simple Vaccine Request, America Isn't Listening." So it's talking about how basically the United States is producing a lot of vaccines, but unlike the other great powers of the world, or the superpowers, Russia and China, we're not doing a whole lot to distribute any of our excess doses to anybody else. And this Perrine article in the New Republic, I'm just going to read from it. He's describing a Washington Post article about this issue, and he says, "But the Post describes such considerations as mere political calculations for Biden, balancing on the one hand an American public that might be upset at seeing, quote, our doses sent overseas or south of the border, versus the government's interest in countering Russian and Chinese vaccine diplomacy, which, as usual for the American press, is treated as inherently nefarious because of the countries doing it." Then he quotes, "The United States authoritarian adversaries," the Post says, "have the field mostly free for the moment to send vaccines to nations from Mexico to Lebanon to Uzbekistan. Their actions have, quote, sparked a debate within the administration about how to balance national security, humanitarian needs, and political concerns." And you can see how they kind of, as an afterthought, wedge humanitarian needs in there, because really the calculation, what's interesting about this story is that the entire calculation is we would hoard all of the vaccine for ourselves, except for the optics of allowing China and Russia to look like the savior of the rest of the world.
Right, of developing nations, yeah.
Right, yeah, exactly. So this is like, and of course, when you dig deeper into this, and Alex gets into this, what it comes down to is that we're much more worried about protecting patent rights than, and making sure that the profit arrangements or the revenue arrangements for the various companies that produce our vaccines are protected, than we are about getting these vaccines out the door. Even in this unique once in a gazillion situation, right, they have to worry about the precedent there. So it's classic, like, just crappy American attitudes towards the rest of the world, especially in a moment when all eyeballs are on us. Trump is out. The world is in crisis. They're looking to us. The one thing that we do have a lot of is money and vaccine, and we don't want to share. So that's a pretty good Democrat suck, I would say.
That's such a good Democrat suck.
It's like that's up there. It's
not
even like a little petty thing, like,
oh no. It's like literally
tandem in the OMB. This is bad.
Yeah, this is like letting people die for profit bad, and also like being bad on this stuff when I thought the Dems were supposed to be the humanitarians compared to Trump, and we're supposed to have empathy. And Perrine's article, most of the world has a simple vaccine request. America isn't listening. Nations across the world are demanding the right to manufacture their own COVID-19 vaccine. Why is the U.S. saying no? And again, what's really interesting is that they're just asking to be able to make their own. They're asking for the WTO to temporarily waive patent protection for the vaccines.
Can't have that.
Yeah. So they can produce their own.
Right.
It's absurd. And like Perrine said, it's so important and so disturbing that the whole conversation, that this is one of those meta stories where it's like the Democrats suck and the Democrat aligned media, whatever you call, like the blue media, like the Washington Post, their framing is so disgusting.
Oh, of course, because they leave out all the underlying issues.
Yeah. You know? And they just make it about like Cold War, kind of like a new Cold War race for diplomats. Like, it's also such a great example of how short-sighted it is, because like you want people to be immune in other countries because people move around.
They do, and then sometimes they even occasionally come to the United States.
Well, yeah, right.
Believe it or not.
Shout out to Big Surprise. Actually, I haven't mentioned him in a couple of episodes, Bernie. He made a video statement in support of waiving the patents. Vaccine diplomacy is what they're calling it, which is interesting. And like, wow, that's a great. I would love for nations to have like a Cold War vaccinating or waiving patent rights. Wouldn't that be great? Like instead of nuclear conflict or nuclear war, it's a vaccine war.
Yeah.
Who can get who can waive patents faster in a world? We have to make that into an action film.
This is a problem that we have constantly, just with our whole system of how we develop drugs in this country is backwards this way. Like a classic example was remdesivir, which was the first drug that was approved for use in treating COVID. Right. It was an already existing drug, and the company that made it, Gilead, there was a group in Bangladesh and India that was able to make this drug generically, and they needed just $10 worth of materials to make it. They were able to produce it at a cost of $600 per dose. Outside the United States, we charged everybody $2,300 a dose for this. Inside the United States, we charged $4,500 a dose for it, and even that price was criticized as being too low, as being unfair to the company. So there's just this enormous sort of yawning chasm between how much it actually costs to make drugs and how much we charge in this country. And a lot of it has been obscured in this crisis because it's been agreed that nobody's going to have to pay out of their own pocket for a vaccine or for any of these medicines. But ultimately, it still comes out of our pocket anyway, because we end up, paying for it in taxes and in inflated costs that we just don't see. So this is just a classic example of it, but except the victims are outside the United States. So
right, it's good. It's a global. It's a universalized. I'm an internationalist, so yeah, I think that these things should always be done, but this is a case where it's just like so blatant and also so clearly in the self-interest of the United States, because again, this is a communicable disease, so.
Right.
Anyway, yeah.
Unless you just want to set the precedent of, we just like to hoard stuff.
Yeah.
That's who we are. I can almost get back.
Hoard America. Hoard America.
Better.
Hoard back better.
Hoard back better.
It's hoard back better, and we're going to let more people die here, not just there. Let people die here, not just there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let's not be inequitable.
Yeah, exactly.
Because equity is the watchword of this new administration.
Right, exactly.
So we're going to have equitable dying. So what do we have for Republicans suck?
Okay, so for Republicans suck, there's so much. I mean, real shout out to all the Republicans, by the way, who are like really feeling bad for undocumented people and their kids. They've developed a great amount of empathy recently.
Absolutely.
Which is really cool to see that they have hearts this late in the game. Mm-hmm. But I decided instead of focusing on that, we could focus on Tucker Carlson. But let's just watch, if we could, the video of the CNN video. There's a lot to unpack here.
Some of the senior-most members of the military are smacking down a Fox host for saying that pregnant women serving in the armed forces are a, quote, mockery of the U.S. military, end quote. Here's what Tucker Carlson, who has never himself served in uniform, maternity or otherwise, said on his show.
So we've got new hairstyles and maternity flight suits. Pregnant women are going to fight our wars. It's a mockery of the U.S. military. While China's military becomes more masculine as it's assembled the world's largest navy, our military needs to become, as Joe Biden says, more feminine, whatever feminine means anymore, since men and women no longer exist. The bottom line is it's out of control, and the Pentagon's going along with this. Again, this is a mockery of the U.S. military and its core mission, which is winning wars.
That comes from Biden's, that whole operation there thing, which we really need to just have constantly playing in the background during transitions.
That outfit,
yeah, that outfit. So they showed a picture of a woman that Carlson showed in a maternity flight suit. Now they're not going to actually be doing that while they're right. They're not. That's for like office. That's for when they're. If later on in this CNN special they talk about how it's for wearing around the office when you're pregnant and in the military, not like random offices, but
or if you got to travel from one place to another while you're in the military.
Right. Yeah.
I'm assuming. Yeah.
Yeah. He's saying it's a mockery. And the military is pushing back, and they're both obviously this is a Republican suck, and obviously I think like Carlson is such a baby, and also his hair kind of moves during that segment in an interesting way we can look at again. But the funny thing is, like, we make fun of this, like the wokery of the armed forces, but we make fun of it because it's so hypocritical. It's like woke feminists bombing innocent brown people.
Right.
Whereas he's bothered by it just because he thinks that the army should be macho. Mm-hmm. Like for him, the army's good. For me, the army's problematic. It's just the opposite. Like I don't know what I'm really doing us a favor here because we really want people to be comparing us to Tucker Carlson more than they already are.
Right. Yeah. Like that's not already happening.
Yeah.
I mean, that segment was absurd. It would be one thing if we were talking about a combat suit. For pregnant women, which I don't think is being envisaged, but he's just going for a cheap response from people who are going to assume that we're sending pregnant women into combat.
Right. But there is something there I feel like we could develop about pregnant. What do you call them when you jump out of a plane?
Paratroopers.
Paratroopers. Like it's actually kind of maybe a good idea.
Maybe, yeah.
Like a bumper car. It's like a bumper car. A bumper human.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not. It would depend on how pregnant you are. I think.
I guess.
I think you probably wouldn't want to do it in your 8th month. I would imagine.
But that gives you that much more padding.
Yeah, I guess so. I feel like this conversation is headed places where there's nothing I can say that could possibly
redeem you.
Yeah,
redeem
exactly.
Us? Yeah. Okay, we can drop it.
I'm all for as many pregnant women as possible being involved in
jumping out of planes.
In the most deadly forms of combat.
Yeah.
So
right.
As I'm generally in favor of anybody, young children.
Yeah.
I think everybody should be in combat and fully armed always. So isn't that weird? Lots of really interesting stories about severe scholastic overreactions to haircuts. This is a good one. So the headline is School Puts Boy in Isolation on First Day Back for His Two-Tone Lockdown Hair. Let's scroll down. And I'm just going to read from it. A student was placed in isolation in his first day back in school due to his two-tone hairstyle as he was unable to go to a hairdresser's. This is in England, obviously. Jacob Lee Stokes received the punishment on the day he was meant to be reunited with his classmates following months of lockdown. The 15-year-old's hair broke school rules after he had dyed it blue and pink, experimenting. Before washing it out and dyeing his naturally ginger hair blonde, Grimsby Live reported. He had been unable to get the color fixed by a professional before restarting at Humbertson Academy, Humbertson in Lincolnshire. A statement from the school, which insisted it is, quote, empathetic, said pupils were expected to, quote, take appropriate steps, having known about the start date for 2 weeks. This is despite hairdressers and barbers being closed under coronavirus restrictions. Mum, Jenna Leaning, said that when she told the school she had no option and that she only owned a pair of dog clippers herself, the response was a recommendation to, quote, shave it off. She told Grimsby Live, Jacob is naturally ginger and it won't take to try to dye it one color. There are loads of students with dyed hair. But I mean, he looks like a kid from a band in the 80s.
Yeah,
right?
he kind of looks like a kid who's like dressed up as Trump or something. I can't, or Barron or something. He kind of
Maybe
looks like Barron,
Barron.
but he looks like he's wearing. It does look like he's wearing a wig. Um, can you
He
just
looks
go up?
kind of like Tilda Swinton
Yeah, he does look like Tilda Swinton. Um,
with like both yellow and orange hair.
Orange, yeah. It's interesting how much the two-tone is offensive. I mean, there are people who have like, I guess I couldn't, like, I have highlights. It's not one monotone, so I wonder if I'd be able to go into that school.
Probably not. Yeah.
But
Uh,
yeah.
but anyway, his hair is too long and it's two colors, which I guess for some reason at that school is unacceptable. So let's go to the next story, which is actually in the Hague. Oh no, I'm sorry. It's also in.
They're in The Hague. They should be. It's a crime.
His name is Hague. I'm sorry.
Humanity.
Boy 13 ordered into school isolation on his first day back over, quote, extreme haircut. Leland Hague, 13, was ordered into isolation by Exmouth Community College in Devon. A teenager eager to finally see his classmates again after a year in lockdown was ordered into isolation on his very first day back at school because of his, quote, extreme haircut. Leland Hague, 13, returned as a year 9 pupil in Exmouth Community College in Devon on March 9th after months of not being able to go to class. So basically, his mother didn't have the proper tools to cut his hair, so she just kind of shaved it around the edges and left it really short on top. But the funny part of the story, if we could scroll down even further, on his first day back, he said he had no break times, no lunch time, and he had to stay in the room all day because of his haircut. They got his lunch from the canteen for him, as he wasn't allowed to leave the room. When he wanted to go to the toilet, he was told he would have to wait until everyone was in class so they would not see his haircut that is deemed unsuitable for school. So
What the hell?
they had to like sneak this kid to and from the bathroom so that no one would be stained by the sin of seeing his too short haircut. So he had to be taken to secret peeing trips during class times. So that happened, and then we have one last story that's basically in the same. Mum slammed school as teen put in isolation as new rules ban ear studs that can't be removed until shops open. A furious mum has lashed out at her after her daughter was put in isolation at school because her earrings were against new rules but can't be removed until shops reopen. Charlotte Robertshaw claims her daughter Eloise, 15, has been failed by her school after being told she'll have to spend 6 hours each day on her own and even eat alone. Then scroll down. Her daughter, who is a year 10 pupil at Trinity Academy in Bradford, West Yorks, has worn ear studs for 2 years without an issue as it was allowed, but new rules which were enforced in February after a different trust took over the school forbid any jewelry from being worn. The single mum of 2 said the school was being unreasonable as they will have to wait at least a month to remove the studs once piercing shops are open again. Eloise was told last Tuesday that she would spend her time in detention until she had them removed, but has since been told she would spend just 6 hours on isolation instead. So these are 3 separate stories of people just being completely like insane about kids' hair.
It's insane. Like they already have isolation. I don't understand why they think it's like they think that kids haven't gone through enough or something.
Yeah, it feels like, in the middle of a pandemic, there should be like just a let it slide clause in some of these rules,
I mean, and just maybe like the safety should be the priority as opposed to like I was going to say decorum, but it's not even decorum. That's, literally as opposed to hairstyles and earrings. But I think that it's a bit problematic, by the way. There's like a lack of solidarity because if we go back to their 3 stories, right? There's the like shaved head, there's the two-tone, and then there's the earrings. Mm-hmm. And shaved head mom, I feel like she's kind of buying into the respectability politics of it. Because she says, I could understand if his hair had markings or things cut into it or had been colored, but he's just literally had a haircut at home, which does not affect his learning. So,
well, I mean, if he shaved like an erect wiener in the side of his head,
then we'd have him on the show probably. But yes,
right? Yeah, exactly.
You notice anything about the kid?
Earring?
Yeah. Why is that not part of the conversation? I feel like that could have been discussed before the hair thing, because that's a black and white case of a terrible rule, but it's very straightforward. Where's the excuse for that? He could remove the earring. See,
Yeah,
the other one can't. You got nothing. Okay. I'm just revealing how arbitrary it is.
Yeah, it's a strange thing. I think it's actually just interesting as a new genre of news story. So if anybody out there sees more stories about people in the COVID era not being able to go to school or not being able to do anything because of their haircut or something like that, we'd be interested in seeing the whole variety of the full spectrum of that kind of weird story. So what do we have for Isn't That Terrible?
So for Isn't That Terrible, we have a really upsetting but kind of interesting, philosophically speaking, story, also from the Mirror, and it's heartless thieves con blind pensioner with fake ambulance as his wife lay dying. Stephen Morris, 45, and Kelly Cassidy, 42, carried out the burglary after Ronald Crowther, 87, rushed into the street to seek help when his wife Dorothy fell gravely ill in the night. This is really sad. Okay, heartbreaking CCTV footage captured these thieves entering the home and was shared by the couple's family in an appeal for information because this couple followed Mr. Crowther, who is blind, into his home on the pretense they would phone an ambulance because his wife would ultimately die, so she lay dying. So this guy thought that the thieves were helping him by ringing for an ambulance, okay? And then he went upstairs to be with his wife, and she had suffered an aneurysm and would die in her bed that night. But instead of calling for an ambulance, the culprits helped themselves to cash and an iPhone from Dorothy's handbag that had been left on a table downstairs before fleeing the house in Brerefield, Lancaster, I guess, Lancashire. After leaving, the pair were seen on camera wiping fingerprints from the door handle before running off. And before the theft, the duo had tried all front door handles of houses on the street during the incident at about 3 a.m. Detectives investigating the case arrested Cassidy and Morris 2 days later and charged them with burglary. Morris was sentenced to 4 years and 3 months, and Cassidy was jailed for 2.5 years. And it looks like could not have happened to a nicer couple.
It's a flattering mugshot.
Yeah, really good. Yeah.
Usually, this segment of the show is a funny story that just happens to be terrible.
Right.
But this is just a terrible story.
I mean, it's a good challenge for us to find the funny in that.
Right. Yeah.
But what I will say is that
robbing blind people is always funny.
Right. It's just not. Robbing blind people is always funny, but when combined with death, here's my real issue with this. Ready? I think this is an important philosophical issue. It would, if they had called for the ambulance and then robbed them blind, didn't even plan that, by the way. If they had called for the ambulance and then robbed them blind, that would be okay. But because they didn't, I don't believe in felony murder, and I think Shahid Buttar and I convinced you not to either. But this is a case where I do feel like maybe they should be tried for manslaughter and convicted of manslaughter.
This probably
reckless
would
endangerment.
Be felony murder, I think.
This makes me want to believe. Well, I don't know if they do that in England. I think they're not quite as barbaric as we are on that front.
The same concept, but yeah, it should be.
Yeah, if there was no death involved, if it was just a straightforward case of robbing the blind,
right? Then we'd just be chuckling about it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, again, as you said, it's a challenge. So can we laugh at robbing dead blind people?
Well, they're not dead at the robbing live. Okay, the challenge is just syntactically. Can we laugh at robbing living blind people dead and in the process killing a seeing person?
Right. Yeah.
Because she was not blind, right? Or were they a blind couple?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
What if she saw it? What if she saw it happening but couldn't communicate because the aneurysm? That would have been terrible.
Right. Then there's a whole mess of stuff going on. He can't see. She can't speak. That is kind of funny.
There we got there.
I mean, it's a defense lawyer's dream, right?
Yes.
Right? Like, I had one witness who couldn't see, another witness who's dead, and even if she wasn't dead, she wouldn't be able to say anything.
It's their defense lawyer. You see, I'm actually. Oh yeah, you're right. Except I'm going to play the prosecutor role, and like, wait, they're not really Cockney usually, right? In addition to stealing from them, she had to spend her final hours seeing a theft she could not.
I see. There's that whole tragedy aspect of it, right?
Oh yeah.
She's watching it and she can't do anything about it.
Yeah.
But and then probably even more disturbing, she's dying, actually.
Right. Well, I know you don't want to have both of those things happening at the same time.
Right,
Let her die in peace without being fleeced. Oh my God, where does this come from? So good.
You're a poet. You didn't even know it.
I didn't even know it. Yeah. What if? Oh God, now this is
I think we're actually just bad people trying to find the humor in this story.
I want we should do stuff like this all the time, so our haters have to discuss these things and not get to anything else. Like this will be the low hanging fruit.
Right.
Making jokes about robbing dead people, robbing dead seeing people, and robbing living
people blind. Yeah. All right. So what's our ruling on this? Is this funny or not? Is your leg here up or down on this?
I mean, this is honestly, everything that we've done until now has been trash. No comedy. This is it. Right. We should just start the episode here. Let's just cold open with what I just said about robbing people. We just cold open and then we play the whole thing backwards like Memento.
So
spoiler
Katie,
alert.
Two people robbed an old blind man and his wife who died of an aneurysm during the commission of the robbery.
That is amazing.
Is that funny?
That is so funny. And welcome to Useful Idiots. I'm your host, Katie Helper.
We have a couple of guests this week.
Yeah.
Who are going to come on and talk some more media stuff. They're co-hosts of a podcast that I listen to a lot called Blocked and Reported. We're going to kind of have two segments. The first is with Jesse Singal, who has kind of been all over the internet in the last week or so in the middle of an insane controversy, which we'll get to. He's also got a new book coming out called The Quick Fix, which is really interesting, which we're going to ask him about first. And then he's going to bring on his co-host, Katie Herzog. So it'll be two Katies, a two Katie show. And they're going to talk about this culture war insanity that's taken over the internet. Without further ado, let's talk to Jesse. So I should admit, I had no idea. I've heard you referencing this book, and I had no idea what it was about. But this is a book that's of one of my favorite genres of nonfiction book, which is the debunking book, and it's really cool. Basically, you go through a whole series of episodes of kind of psychological fads that were later exposed, or you're exposing, as being less than advertised. And so it's interesting both from a media perspective and from a science perspective. But first, can you talk about how you chose this topic?
Yeah, I've always been a journalist, but I went to grad school for public policy 2011 to 2013, graduated, had no idea what I was going to do. I lucked into a fellowship in Berlin, which if you're going to go spend a year somewhere, you could do worse than Berlin. I was sitting in a coffee shop, I knew I wanted to come back to New York, trying to figure out what to do. I saw New York Magazine was starting a social science vertical. So I applied, and I was the editor of Science of Us, rest in peace. And for a couple of years at New York Magazine, I was writing and editing pieces about social science. And during the span, social psychology in particular started to sort of melt down. And there was more and more signs that a lot of what they were, selling people was just not true. And I sort of did enough of these debunking pieces that it became my thing. So yeah, this sort of became my issue, debunking shoddy behavioral science. And my agent just said, let's try to sell a book about it. And it worked out.
So there's a whole bunch of episodes in this book. Some are more preposterous than the other. The first one that jumped out to me was the super predators one. Can you talk to a little bit about that story? Because this is something that was it was all over pop culture for a while, in the late 90s, early 2000s. Is that when this became big?
Yeah, I'd say mid to late 90s, most of all. Yeah, this is sort of the odd man out in the book because it's not really a story about social psychologists per se, but this is a psychological theory. Okay, so mid-90s, there's this scary rise in youth crime. There's actually a lot of crime in America. There had been a rise for decades. And this guy named John DiIulio, who's a political scientist at Pennsylvania, he posits that kids are becoming super predators. They grow up in these negative environments where they don't have role models, they don't have churches. He's very big into churches. And they became these sort of amoral killing machines who don't understand the future. They have no restraint of their impulses. He did the colorblind thing, but he was clearly talking about black kids because that was the focus of this crime panic was black kids, right. Particularly the idea of black kids killing white people, which, didn't happen as much. And if you're a student of sort of criminal justice reform, this was a time when all these really bad laws were being passed that let you try kids as adults at younger and younger ages, making it harder to expunge criminal records. And part of the reason those laws picked up steam was because people believed in this like behavioral science idea that there are all these super predators. And not only that, that because of demographics, like more and more kids of boomers becoming teenagers, there's going to be even more super predators. So DeUlio and his colleagues, they thought that by the year 2000, the whole country was going to be like a freaking war zone. But they were wrong about everything. And to me, the most important thing they were wrong about was the idea that, imagine a 14-year-old caught up in the crack trade who kills a rival on a street corner. That's horrible and it's tragic. That doesn't mean he's like an inhuman killing machine. It means when you put people in ridiculously horrible circumstances, they do bad things, which it's like when you use the example of a child soldier in Africa, people can understand that.
Right.
But for some reason with like kids and drug gangs, there's less empathy for some reason. So, this idea did a lot of damage because it really made people dehumanize kids who were themselves, even as they were victimizing others, they were victims. And it's an idea of how an idea that has like no actual scientific evidence behind it can spread far and wide on the wings of fear in this case.
Right. Not only that, crime plummeted, as you point out in the book after that, right? Again, there isn't a great explanation for why that happened, like not one that anybody agrees upon, but he was definitely wrong about that.
About his prediction that it would soar, right?
Yeah, I think it's more there are almost too many explanations. Like part of it is just as the crack trade broke up, there was less crime. But yeah, he could not have been more wrong about that. And not only him, but these James Q. Wilson, who's sort of a legendary
Broken Windows,
right?
Yeah, Broken Windows. Yeah.
And of course, people may be familiar with that term. People who are younger may be familiar with that term thanks to Hillary Clinton invoking it. And speaking of tough on crime and dehumanizing criminal justice, we were talking about that earlier, talking about the president, of course, Joe Biden, who bragged that there was no major or minor crime bill that didn't have his name on it. But before we go into the other really interesting parts of chapters and foci of the book, can you talk about the IAT?
I bet a lot of your listeners are familiar with the basics, but this is a test they'll give you during diversity training. For me, I think my test is real because it said I'm slightly biased against white people.
Wow, really?
So that must be true. I'm scientifically not racist. So this is a test where you... anyone can take it. You can take it. Just don't trust the results. You hit I if you see a black face or a bad word. E if you hit a white face, see a white face or a good word, and they switch that. Algorithm, numerical magic, it spits out a score that is presumably how biased you are against certain groups.
Jesse, why don't you put that in your bio, like up top, so your critics have to be like a bias towards white person according to the IAT test. Jesse Singal.
Jesse Singal is a former staffer at New York Magazine who received a negative score on the black-white IAT.
There you go.
I like the sound of that. It was introduced in 1998. It has revolutionized our discussion of racism in America. The idea is that, and this was the argument of the creators of the test, like even though people aren't explicitly racist anymore, and I think survey-wise there's pretty good evidence that explicit racism has gone down, though there's still some of it, we're all carrying around this implicit racism, and that's why racist outcomes persist. What I argue in the book is that every investigation of a major police department that kills people reveals plenty of explicit bias. It's not like that's absent. B, there is such a thing as structural racism. And even though there isn't legal segregation today, it still exists. So my gripe is the IAT pretends that racist outcomes emerge because we're all secretly individually biased, which, if you follow, I'm not an expert on sort of race theory and the sociology of this, but this is like specifically what people were saying we shouldn't believe not too long ago. Like the whole like Michelle Alexander, Eduardo Bonilla Silver thing is like, it's racism without racists. You don't need individually racist people to generate racist outcomes.
Right.
But because of this test, which it turns out barely predicts anything and is almost statistically worthless, all we talk about now is implicit bias.
Right. Which also means what are the solutions are not structural. I mean,
that's why I think people like this stuff, because you can, if the answer is we need to take money that's going to rich kids' schools and put it in poor kids' schools, people don't like that. If the answer is, you need to reduce white people's implicit bias, okay, I'll take a 5 minute to fuck it.
Right. And when you talk about it being statistically worthless, you give a lot of examples like the test-retest score. Can you talk a little bit about some of the things that were subsequently found out, or at least argued by its critics.
Yeah, worthless is too strong a word, but it is not the... If you take the IAT and then you take it again in a few hours or a day, you will get likely a very different score. The whole argument from the beginning of the test's inception was this test predicts how likely you are to be racist, which is like, that would be incredible. That's like fortune telling. If a little 10-minute computer exercise predicts your real world behavior. There's almost no evidence it predicts anything. There's like a tiny correlation between people's IAT scores and how they act in sort of laboratory settings, but it's so small that the test creators themselves have said you should not use this to diagnose individuals. So it's unclear what is being revealed when you take this test or exactly what it's measuring, which calls into question why the whole psychological establishment promotes it so much. Because if you had a test that supposedly measures anxiety or depression or anything other than racism, and it was this statistically noisy, I think you'd have a strong argument it's unethical to sort of tell people their score. It's just been sort of incredibly overhyped. And remarkably, one of the big morning shows just like 2 weeks ago, in the year of our Lord 2021, did yet another segment that ignored all the criticisms of it and just treated it as true. So it's sort of a zombie idea that won't die.
It could mean something, right? I mean, it's possible, but when you take the test, it also seems clear that it would probably work if you inserted all kinds of variables in there, right? Like if you had...
That's one of the things they did. They made up a fake group of people called Nafians, a non-existent ethnic group. Mm-hmm. And they proved that people
I identify that. That's how I identify, yeah.
You're Nafian adjacent.
I'm Nafian adjacent,
exactly.
Yeah.
No, they proved that this group of, I guess, college kids was racist against Nafians, as proven by their IAT score. So, yeah, I think part of what it measures is something that could be called implicit bias, but it also measures so many other things. Plus, with different people, it could be measuring different things. The brain is really complicated. The idea that you can take a 10-minute test and like reveal something sturdy about it is unlikely.
But is it because you said it changes? So maybe it's like I'm in a racist mood right now. I'm in a less racist mood.
I was going to say, it seems like you're in a very racist mood at the moment.
You seem a little racist right now. Why don't you take a walk, do some exercise?
It's giving off the aura.
It's like arthritis or a chronic thing
it's inflamed.
Where your racism is acting
up.
Exactly. It's going to rain tomorrow, so my racism is
flaring. Exactly. Yeah.
But how much of this is also... I mean, I hate this word because it's so overused now, but it feels like a little bit of an academic grift in a lot of these cases, right? Like what does that really measure exactly, right? Like, it feels like it's describing less about the person who's taking the test than it is about the person who's designing the test, right? Like they're basically telling you how they're interpreting data.
Yeah, no, that's exactly the right question, because there's this concept in psychology of external validity. So I do an experiment, I measure you somehow. How much does that measurement correlate to anything we care about in the real world? And the answer is often these lab experiments don't really mean anything. But because of like the incentives of getting a book deal or doing a TED Talk, researchers, I don't think they're intentionally grifting, but like imagine either of you guys, if someone was like, we'll give you... Actually, I don't think TED Talk people get paid, but they get huge just premiums to their reputation. There's shitty incentives. So I think most of the scientists in my book are not grifters per se, but there's this like media and institutional thing that just really incentivizes them to overclaim.
So what's the media's role in all this? Because that feels like it has to be massive in almost all of these cases, right?
Every one of these ideas, I'd say, except for one that wasn't as famous, any of them, you Google them, New York Times, NPR, NBC, just glowing pieces about this revolutionary new idea. Very little quoting of skeptics. Skeptics often get sort of yelled down one way or another. I was at New York Magazine, and we would get these press releases from universities that were like, it's always like something very sexy and counterintuitive. Like, oh, did you know that if you ask someone who's greedy to draw a face, it'll be frownier? Just like bullshit. Like that's a made up example, but that kind of like, oh my God, that's crazy. And oftentimes these studies were useless. And we've since learned that there's this big thing called the replication crisis, where if you take a study from psychology at random and you try to run it back and get the same result, something like half the time you just won't. They were ghosts in the noise, or whatever the term is. Like there's so many bad methodological tools that you can find anything.
Also, Hillary Clinton, I want to just bring up, I just remember brought up the IAT also, right? Did she bring it up by name or just implicit bias in her first debate with Trump?
I bet any politician has to mention implicit bias at this point because it's such a meme.
Can you talk about the power posing, the grit? Can we go through some of the other things you debunk?
And I should say, like, a lot of these cases, there were already like good researchers who'd done some of the debunking. The point of the book is not just to debunk them, but to explain what cultural niche they filled. Power posing is this idea that if you stand in like a, arms out, assertive pose, it'll make you feel more powerful at work. And
Matt, we should do that when we do our show. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, we should do that before every show.
So the claim there by a woman named Amy Cuddy, who was at Harvard, is that this could improve workplace gender equity. And this got very much tied in with the Sheryl Sandberg lean in thing, which was this whole subset of feminism. And I'm sure, a lot of people remember this, but this whole ideology was centered around individual women need to act different.
Right.
They need to act more confident or seek out more responsibility at work. And for all these ideas, there's like an element of common sense. Like, yeah, you should seek opportunity. You should try to be confident. When you try to like look into the reasons why women don't have the same opportunities as men in the workplace, that's not really about confidence or feeling powerful. It's societal roles and expectations. Right. It's the way men have old boys networks that help support them. So my gripe with all these ideas is they take some like sexy little slice of the world and like zoom in on it. Like, ooh, power. We'll make women feel more powerful. That's not really much of what's going on. And it's similar with grit, which is in theory a way to measure how much someone will sort of stick to tasks and feel passionate and be conscientious. I scored in the 10th percentile on grit, which makes sense because I was like a shitty student. This was presented again as a way of dealing with educational inequality.
I got the 30th percentile on the test.
There we go.
Yeah.
But this is another example where, like, think of the difference between the schools I got to go to growing up and the schools in the poorest part of Boston with just, frankly, worse teachers, worse facilities, worse opportunity, living in neighborhoods without good jobs. To say that one of the main reason for the inequality, or a major reason, is those kids don't have enough grit is like, it's sort of maddening. And I actually quote at length from a book called When Grit Is Not Enough by a woman who ran I can't remember if it was a charter school or a test school in Boston. She has all these stories of kids who worked much harder than I did. And they got all the way to college. And then suddenly there was some student fee they couldn't pay or some tuition bill they couldn't pay. And that's it.
Not enough grit.
But these,
exactly.
These are the kind of stories.
Sort of
they're the kind of stories that editors in big urban newspapers love, or local TV stations love, because what does your highest income based viewer, what do they like to hear? And they don't want to hear that they've designed society in a way that is inherently unfair and that they're the lucky beneficiaries of that. They want to hear that there's some quick fix solution that can, all you have to do is do power posing or give people more grit or whatever it is.
Well, yeah, or check your privilege or do a Robin DiAngelo training or some sort of spiritual quest to find the source of your bias. It's never like integrate your neighborhood.
Yeah,
support policies that will, that's my main gripe.
Yeah, we often see people like use this language of empowerment and anti-racism to avoid looking at these things that we could do that are structural.
Yeah. I also think the author of Grit, Angela Duckworth, she is very successful academic. She's been more honest than many others about the limitations of her ideas. You read her book, it's story after story of someone who was downtrodden, then they worked hard, and now they're the CEO of whatever. But it's like, it's no shit. You're Angela Duckworth. You're a UPenn professor. Everyone in your social network is successful. Yeah. It's what we call, or survivor bias. I think the more honest way to do that is like, why don't you also walk around Brownsville or whatever the Brownsville equivalent of Philadelphia is and talk to people there? Do you think they didn't work hard? Do you think they lacked grit? There's something I find very one-sided about the whole discourse.
So what's nudging?
Nudging
is it nudging or nudging?
It's nudging if you're Jewish.
Yeah. So Matt, don't say nudging because that's appropriation.
Right.
We'll say nudging. You say nudging. Yeah.
Nudging is one of the ideas that has some merit behind it, but is also overhyped. It's basically people are not very rational in their decision making. Like I know this. I eat a lot of shitty food. I walk around New York. I'll pop in, grab a slice of pizza I don't need. Nudging is the idea if you add extra obstacles, or it's called choice architecture. You frame the way people make their choices in different ways. So cafeteria, you put the desserts in the back, you put the fruits up front. There's evidence that has some effect on people's behavior. And I'm in favor of like defaulting to double-sided printing to save paper, and Cass Sunstein is the godfather of nudging. I don't really have a beef with it, but I make this argument and talk about other people's arguments that at one point Cass Sunstein talking about the mortgage crisis, he focuses on the clarity of the contracts and the fact that people signed contracts with ridiculous terms. What I think sometimes gets obscured here is like, why are we allowing people to sign on to ridiculously exploitative mortgages? And when you focus too much on like these individual nitpicky things like, let's make the contract language bigger so you don't need a microscope to read it, stuff like that, you can agree that, that's fine.
They should have done that for Native Americans. If they had like a bigger font, they would have fared a lot better with the treaties. Yeah.
Exactly. But it's the same thing. You're sort of obscuring the power relations, the role of big finance. And I'm pro nudging. I'm against making nudge like a whole ideology about it, how to fix the world.
Or in place of something else, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Did you talk to any scientists who were just dismissive in an angry way of this whole culture of it feels like it's an admixture of academia and media and pop culture that to a real scientist probably must be offensive and obnoxious. Were there people who were contemptuous of all these ideas?
Yeah, there's this sort of subculture of debunky scientists. What's weird, the incentives are so screwed up that if you're the guy who carefully goes through someone else's work and debunks it, you're much less likely to have a good career than if you're the person who overclaims. So the incentives are really off. The other interesting thing is that whole Bernie bro thing where people who like Bernie are seen as harassers. There's a version of that going on in what's called the open science movement. You have these incumbents, these like powerful social psychologists who are tenured, who often spread misleading ideas. Then you have young untenured grad students and young faculty who do blog posts being like, this person's full of shit statistically. And the incumbents go, that's harassment to call me full of shit. Yeah. How could you do that? And one of them even used the term methodological terrorism to describe the people debunking her work. So it's the same thing where it's like these civility arguments are often used as a way to derail real conversation.
It's like we talk a lot about identity politics, but then there's also civility politics, which can often go hand in hand, but are just a way we've seen it done to like totally stifle any debate, any questioning. I mean, going back to the whole Neera Tanden and Matt Bruenig thing, that whole thing was a fight about welfare reform and Neera's role in it. And because of a couple of people, was no longer, I mean, the fact that Matt Bruenig was then removed from the think tank Demos, to me is like such a great example of how civility politics have an outcome in policy. Right, because you remove someone who has these certain ideas from a think tank. They're like removed from the decision-making process.
Well, the other thing is like, especially when everyone's on Twitter, any opinion you hold, you can find opponents who are actually kind of assholes, and you can focus on them and use them to sort of denigrate the whole movement. It's like a cheap game at that. Like, what is a political position on Twitter where there aren't idiots screaming? I mean, it's just, it's endemic. So it's an easy way to get out of like an actual conversation.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff in this book. There's a whole $500 million plus anti-PTSD program the military set up that was just like a crazy scandal. There's other chapters. So I hope people will consider ordering it. For a first-time author, early sales make a huge difference, and a surprisingly small number makes a huge difference. But
is one of the problems with all this that there's probably not a lot of upside for a scientist to take on an established theory or something that's popular or is selling a lot of books. Probably not going to win you grants or book deals or anything like that.
I think that's changing a little bit, but yes. I mean, I know from trying to sell a book on this, one of a publisher's concerns will be like, this book is too negative and too debunky. Within the culture of psychology, this is changing. Like, it didn't used to be considered normal or like polite to attempt to replicate a study or to ask for someone's data, which is a way of checking, that they were careful with it. That is changing, especially toward the end of my book. I talk about the way psychology is starting to reform itself. And I think the studies that get released, 10 years from now will be a lot more trustworthy than the crap we've seen in the recent past.
So it's almost like they feel like you're nudging them if you ask them to a question. Yeah. Well, this was so great and really excited to read your book. But really, we invite you here. You were bait because we really would just want to talk to Katie Herzog. You're co-host.
It's understandable.
Blocked and Reported.
We're looking for the double Katie effect.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the Katie H on Katie H. Yeah, definitely looking forward to your book. And now we're going to have you and your co-host Katie Herzog of Blocked and Reported talk about your podcast and the recent scandal you're involved in.
Scandal. Major
scandal. Yeah.
We have two guests that I'm really excited about to have. They're co-hosts of a podcast that I actually listened to. Yeah, Blocked and Reported was the first podcast that wasn't sports that I regularly listened to.
Wow.
Yeah. So
it is the first ever podcast, so it makes sense. The first one. Yeah.
And I really enjoy it. I think the dynamic between both of you is great. So this is Jesse Singal and Katie Herzog. They're the co-hosts of a show called Blocked and Reported, and both of you got more you, Jesse, than Katie, but you both got sucked into this insane internet controversy that we want to ask you about in a moment. But I thought it would be good to sort of start with a little bit of background about what the podcast is, and also first how you two came to know each other. I know you've answered that question before, but our listeners may not know it.
Sure, I can take this one. So Jesse and I met when I sent him. He would probably call this fan mail. I would not call it fan mail, but I sent him an email. I was working on a story for The Stranger, Seattle's Alt Weekly, where I used to be a staff writer. And I had read Jesse's work on gender dysphoria and trans issues, and I was really impressed by it because it was different than almost everything that I'd read. And Jesse seemed incredibly detail oriented. What I know now is that he's pedantic by nature and he can't help it.
I don't know if pedantic is exactly the right word, but fuck you, Katie.
That's the other Katie H, not to me. Yeah.
I do get confused for you sometimes.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So I sent Jesse an email asking him to comment on my piece, and he refused because he wanted all of the glory for himself. But we ended up sort of striking up an email correspondence, and then we met in New York a couple months after that. I was there for the Heterodox Academy conference. And we sort of struck up a friendship. I tried to have as few cis straight males in my life as possible, but I've made an exception for Jesse.
They have to work twice as hard, right?
Yeah.
To become your friend.
Yeah.
Excellent. And so what was the genesis of doing the podcast together?
Yeah, I think March 20th is the anniversary.
Happy anniversary.
Happy anniversary. My ring is in the mail.
Yeah.
I think it was early days of lockdown, I believe, and we had talked. I had her on this like little baby podcast I did. We had just talked about our respective experiences, and you had taken a buyout from The Stranger, right? I have the timing right?
It was not a buyout, but yes, I was furloughed from the paper.
You had taken a $0 buyout from The Stranger, and we were just like, "There's a lot of crazy shit going on in journalism right now. A lot of crazy shit on the internet. Why not talk about it and see what happens?" And I think we wouldn't have launched it if we didn't think there was a chance it would be successful. But we've been surprised, like how many listeners we've picked up, and we're really grateful about that.
Right. So an initial focus of the show was sort of the controversies going on in the media. That was a lot of what you talked about initially. Right?
Yeah, we frame it as just like internet bullshit, but internet bullshit and media bullshit are now like Venn diagram circles.
Yeah,
it's the same circle.
And well, by the way, I'm very. I felt a lot of erasure, and I was very invisibilized. I heard your last episode where you talk about Bernie Bros, and you listed some people who were Bernie Bros. Not Katie Halper. I didn't make the cut, and I tried. Matt had to talk me out of canceling because I was not going to. I'm going to cancel you guys.
It was nip and tuck.
Yeah, that's fair.
That's fair.
That was rank misogyny on our part.
Misogyny and anti-Semitism.
Yes, we erased you. Yeah.
Self-loathing.
But if you talk about Katie Halper in the wrong way, you get a wave of death threats and rape threats, and we didn't want that to happen.
That's true. Yeah, I sick my followers onto people. Yeah.
Oh, that leads into the question of the day, which is about this whole brouhaha, which is going to force all of us to explain a little bit of the background anyway. But so, Jesse, you became the focus of an incredible amount of insane attention in the last week or so. Can you sort of give us the chronology of what happened? I mean, this is tied into something to Substack, which Katie and I are both connected to as well. Yeah. But just if you could just sort of lead us through what happened to cause all this controversy.
Yeah, I mean, so anyone who wants can pull up the articles I've written about gender dysphoria. One of them was sort of defending a doctor who was, his clinic was shut down because he was falsely accused of some stuff. Everyone agrees that's true. My reporting, I think, led to a lawsuit, and the hospital gave him a settlement. No one disputes the facts of that. I was accused of defending conversion therapy because he was accused of conversion therapy. So by the associative property of internet bullshit, if you defend someone who's accused of a thing, that means you're in favor of the thing.
Wasn't part of his complaint in the lawsuit that he was improperly accused of conversion therapy?
I don't remember the
This is Dr.
details.
Zucker, right?
Zucker, yeah. And the fact of the matter is that I think his approach to deciding when kids should transition is more conservative than others. But this idea that he was like torturing kids and trying to get them to go from trans to cis, there's not evidence for that. Since then, there's been basically internet weirdos popped up trying to start basically sexual rumors about me, which is very creepy. This is also a subplot of Alice Drager's book, Galileo's Middle Finger, which is what got me into all this. If you write about these issues in the wrong way, people try to destroy you. So there'd be like sock puppet accounts that'll be like, my friend had this experience with Jesse you would not believe, over and over and over since 2017. I was able to mostly ignore it because like it is pseudonymous internet sock puppet accounts. I don't know who's doing them. There's nothing I can do about it. Eventually it got picked up by a couple of very mainstream writers, Nicole Cliff at Slate and Jude Doyle. And they just like have sort of said unhinged shit about me. And the most recent brouhaha was Jude Doyle said in a Substack piece about how he's thinking of leaving Substack because bigots like me are on it, that everyone knows I have stalked so many trans women. Like the phrasing was like, there's so many stories. He can't think of a trans woman who doesn't have a negative story about me.
Okay, so here's the quote from his article, which is called "In Queers We Trust, all their others pay cash," and it's about Substack, and it says they host Jesse Singal, a high-profile supporter of anti-trans conversion therapy, who is also widely known to fixate on and stalk trans women in and around the media industry. I would list Jesse's target, but at this point, I don't know a trans woman in media who doesn't have a story. So that's a highly specific kind of thing that, you know, in the news media, like it jumps out at you because stalk is a word that's it's associated with a crime. So normally, you know, it's a pretty dramatic thing to say in print. What is he referring to there?
I don't know. I mean, it's a mix of the sock puppet accounts, and then there's that thing where once you guys have both seen this, I'm sure. Once you become controversial, people will go back and revisit their past interactions with you. So someone posted a list of all the harassment I've done last night or 2 days ago. This would be like I would quote retweet someone and say, this is a lie. This is not true. This is considered harassment. I'm a harasser. And then so disagreeing becomes harassment. At some point that's repeated enough, harassment becomes stalking. I'm sure by next week someone will accuse me of having like murdered somebody. It's this sort of concept creep and harm inflation, but no, I do not know what this is in reference to in terms of like a specific person I stalked.
I think that it's so brilliant and dishonest to say, like, it would honestly be easier for me to count on one hand the number of trans women who have not been stalked by him. Like, the idea that you don't have to name names because everyone is.
But nobody can even name a victim. It's fucking QAnon.
And it's absurd. And people are already going to be responding to this like, they make so much money. Why are you having them on your show? He's a straight, white, cis man. And unless the person's impoverished, it's like violence to even talk about it. Like, you are having any success means that we shouldn't even care about this.
Well, that's another thing that Jude Doyle wrote on Substack. So Jude announced that they're going to be leaving Substack. A bunch of people have announced this. They're going to be leaving Substack in protest of Substack's platforming transphobes like Jesse and Glenn Greenwald and Andrew Sullivan. And so they're gonna move to some other platform. My idea is that everybody should just join that platform, and then slowly they'll just get driven off of the internet. But so one thing that Jude wrote was that, you know, why, I saw this on Twitter yesterday, why is Jesse isn't going to prison? Why is Jesse complaining about being censored and about not being able to get published? And at the same time, if you're going to be someone who pretends to care about workers, you need to care about writers getting deplatformed. But instead, they are the people doing the deplatforming. It's just so fucking inconsistent.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I want to ask about that too, because there's two different things going on here. First, I guess just I should ask what to doing that Atlantic cover story and some of the other stories you did subsequently. What did that? How did that affect your career generally? But because the second part of this equation is you end up on Substack, which is essentially a home for people who've kind of been pushed out of mainstream media in some cases. I mean, not everybody, but the demand here is essentially like, we don't want you to publish anywhere. Like, not only do we not want you in regular media, we want you out of this other thing too, which is kind of ominous. But can you talk about the progression of how this, even covering this topic has affected your career?
Yeah. So the Atlantic cover story was focused on, a 12 or 13-year-old wants to go on puberty blockers and hormones. What should that process look like? There was like a 750-word section early in the article about how trans people have been cut off from medical care historically and how wrong that is, because it is. The story was very clear about that. But because it was seen as just asking questions, that's the phrase they always use, on what is in fact a difficult issue, it was viewed as anti-trans. I would just say people should read it and decide for themselves. Here's where the conversation gets complicated. I cannot claim in any sense to have been canceled as a result of that. I had crazy shit written about me. I had people lie about me. I think by any reasonable metric, it enhanced my platform, and I'm much safer in journalism, a few years later than I am. The problem is, I don't know if that's true in terms of like, if I do want to pitch to mainstream institutions, which, maybe that's just the way it is. No one has a right to be published everywhere. But I know from Twitter that a bunch of editors at big publications think I stalk trans women, which is the sort of thing that just like eats your soul. I mean, Matt, you've had experience with false. I mean, it destroys you to see people publicly saying shit about you and refusing to provide evidence that isn't true. The other thing is I think people in me and Katie's position, there's a risk of going like the full intellectual dark web Dave Rubin route. And I don't think cancel culture is a bigger threat than like Trump. I don't think you should build your career out of fighting cancel culture. I think conservatives are sometimes the most aggressive cancelers of all. Iraq war critics. You got they don't invite you on MSNBC because of your Russiagate skepticism. So the risk is getting typecast. I think Katie and I would both like to continue writing for mainstream publications. Katie just said on our last episode, she was told by an editor at a national publication she writes for that she just can't write there that often because the staffers get mad every time they do. And these days it's 25-year-old staffers and web producers who basically decide what arguments are aired. We know this firsthand from the Times, where they make personnel decisions that are usually left to more experienced journalists.
Right. And the other thing is, like, so even if there are editors who believe that Jesse has been smeared and libeled and would like to support him, if you have a bunch of if you have something that you want covered or whatever, why would you go to Jesse when you could go to so many other freelancers who aren't going to result in you getting complaints from your staffers? So even if we're not seeing this, even if Jesse's book hasn't been canceled yet, even if he's still getting published at places like New York Magazine where he has existing relationships, I am sure there are lots of editors who will not touch a Jesse Singal story because it just, no matter how good it is, no matter how thorough a journalist he is, it just comes with headaches.
And I should be clear that because we've been so fortunate because of the podcast and because even this controversy led to a big surge of both Patreon and Substack subscribers, I'm fine. Like, of all the people to worry about in journalism, don't worry about me. But if this had happened to me 10 years earlier when I wasn't as established and couldn't just build my own audience on Substack, I would have been screwed. So just think about the incentives. Like, if you're a 25-year-old journalist now, why would you possibly touch one of these hot button issues when it could overnight ruin your reputation forever? I'm much more worried about those people than myself. I'll be fine.
Well, except there was a moment after this story was published when one of the things that Jude was complaining about was these Substack Pro advances that some people have gotten. Like, the company has offered essentially guaranteed money for a year as an incentive for people to come join Substack. and Jude was complaining that that he hadn't been offered that. And when apparently the company did offer a Substack Pro deal, the response was like, "I won't take it unless you get rid of Jesse Singal," and
that's why this was such a weird piece and hard to follow, because they didn't really say that. Okay.
So I just want to clear this up because I contributed to accidental misinformation here. My understanding is that they told Jude they would be open to having that discussion. I don't think they officially offered, but Jude presented that as, I'm not even going to talk to them unless they get rid of Jesse Singal and Graham Linehan. That's another story. But
okay, so it's basically like I wasn't offered a good pay deal, and then in order to have a discussion about said pay deal, potential paid deal, I will not be having that unless you fire Jesse.
Yeah, it's an interesting negotiating tactic that failed because now Jude is going elsewhere. I wasn't offered any money, any pro deal, just for the record.
This gets to another question, and I know you've both talked about this on your podcast. I remember you talking about this in the case of the Donald McNeil reporting with the Daily Beast coverage. There's often like an allegation of something, bigotry, but they don't get into the specifics of it. Right. Like you'll have a word that's thrown around, and then you won't actually hear what the details are, but the description itself the characterization is powerful. But what I thought was particularly scary about your incident, Jesse, is that it was an attempt to replicate all of those kind of mainstream newsroom dramas in like a subscription only format, right? Like, so you have all these, everybody's who works in a mainstream news organization has gone through a thing now where the newsroom wants somebody gone, and oftentimes it happens, like whether it's James Bennett or McNeil or whatever. But here they're essentially trying to do that with an independent contractor, which felt like a crazy escalation to me. Success is the best revenge, and we're both glad that your podcast is doing well. And where can people find you?
Blocked and Reported or jessesingal.substack.com and Twitter.
I'm on Substack. I have a Substack that I never update called Moose Nuggets. It's about canine testicles.
It's about your dog's testicles, right?
It's about
that's a whole drama, right? Have you made a decision about that?
I'm deciding whether or not to castrate my dog. What I'm leaning towards right now is keeping his testicles and cutting off his penis. We'll see how it goes, but
really? No, our dog is fixed.
Really. I'm not cutting off the dog's dick.
Oh, I was like,
yeah, well,
I'm so dumb. I don't know about animals.
Well, whatever you decide, good luck with it.
Thank you.
Excellent, Katie. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, and thanks,
Jesse, thanks for coming.
Thanks, guys. Thank you.
Thanks for
having me so much. That whole thing was great.
Well, that was great.
Yeah, that was great. People have no idea what's going on with this Substack, by the way. So we got to do like a 10-hour explainer.
Yeah, I don't know if it's going to be 10 hours. Look, we moved from Rolling Stone to Substack. There are some technical issues and some logistical issues that are going to take some working out, but we'll get there. You will eventually be able to get the podcast in all the same places that you got it previously. The question right now is whether it's going to be via the same feed or via a new feed, and we're still working that out.
We're like 1,000 years old and have no idea what this is, this brave new world of RSS feeds.
I'm almost a boomer old.
The important thing is, here's the deal. Ready, guys? Okay, make sure you go to Substack, and we are releasing free material, and we are releasing paid-only material. I sound so resentful. This probably isn't very welcoming.
It's welcoming. No,
it's
you have
welcoming.
To go to,
okay.
but you have to go to usefulidiots.substack.com.
Usefulidiots.substack.com. And we have already released the main audio episode and the main video episode. And next, you'll already be able to, by the time you're listening or viewing this, access the Substack-only audio and video.
Right.
So don't freak out. You'll
get the hang of this.
You'll get the hang of it. Don't freak out about, we'll have an RSS feed for you shortly. And don't freak out about, is it not free? No, it's free. It's free and then extra paid. No one is getting any less podcast or video than before.
Yeah, this was the workaround when we moved from Rolling Stone to here. We knew that some people who are used to getting the show for free were not going to appreciate paying for it. The solution that we came up with was we'll just make more content.
Yeah.
So it's basically as much content as you were getting before for free. If you want to subscribe and pay extra. There's going to be some more content, and that will help us pay the bills and do the technical stuff. But that's up to you. So thanks so much for everybody who's already supported the show, and we're glad to be continuing. And we will see you next week.